Welcome to the space where creators have aligned a positive and intellectual collab of open minds for sharing and learning from one another. It's a vibe. We do Rosa podcast on the mic. Subscribe, educators spitting bars. I guess you didn't know I'm multifaceted and humble, checking off life goals. The classroom is my comfort zone where I plant and sow seeds of knowledge, compassion, empathy, and hope. Reading is the key to unlocking your potential. Countless benefits, including cognitive and mental. Regardless of the genre, books are highly influential. Go get yours, I'll get mine. Making strides, monumental. Come rock with me and get down to this new jam. With my friends, I had a very simple plan. Educate the masses through books and life lessons. It's the grand slam. I'm out. Welcome to the Reads with Rosa podcast and happy Rotuman Language Week. On today's show, we have a Rotuman poet. She is the author of the poetry collection, The Light and Dark in Our Stuff. Her writing has appeared in several publications, and most recently, she was a contributor to the 𝚁𝚎𝚅 anthology, Stories by Women of the Moana. I am so excited and honored to welcome to the show, 𝚁𝚅𝚜𝚅 Taito. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rosa. You know, I don't really know who's more excited here. I think I'm more excited to be on the show. So I'm so curious about the podcast. But no ai ngangach tu at koa at wasa le mere Taito ngo handru tumet ngo no e kirikiri roa e Nisirongi o te rua le tarusila ma mua Taito o te hunta hene malaha ma o te whata whane matau. So what I've just said to you is a typical Rotuman introduction where I say my name and I make mention my parents. Your parents are always part of your introduction. You are the daughter of two people. So I mention my mother, 𝚁𝚘𝚝, I mention my father, Moa Taito, and I also make mention to the districts from where they come from in Rotuma. My mother is from the district of Malaha, and my dad is from the district of Matau. So by Rotuman custom, matrilineally, that means I am a woman of Malaha first, and then a woman of Matau, which my dad, turns up his nose a number of times. But that's who I am. I'm a woman of Rotuma, a daughter of Rotuma. I moved to New Zealand in 2007. I was born and raised in Fiji, educated in Fiji, moved to New Zealand in 2007, and I've been here since 2014. So that's me. Very short introduction of myself.
Wow, that was fantastic. I was just in awe because I don't think I've ever heard the Rotuman language before. So I was like blown away. Like I could, with our Pacifica languages, there are a few. I was like, oh, that I think it means that, but no, I don't think. I think I had it all wrong. So thank you so much, 𝚁𝚜𝚜, for that introduction. So you mentioned, let's go back to Rotuma. Like, for those of us who are unfamiliar, you mentioned Fiji. It's north of Fiji, but so we think Fiji, and definitely, I'm sure for people listening, they think tourists and tourism. So when we think Rotuma, how would you describe your homeland?
That's such a good question. And you've mentioned a number of things here. Fiji, its proximity to Fiji, it's Fiji's association with tourism. Rotuma is very much an untouched place. By that I mean there is no tourism on the island. We don't have backpackers. We don't encourage tourism on the island, which is something that I really, really love. And I hope that we don't ever have tourism on the island. It is a very small island. It is slightly smaller than Waiheke. If you're familiar with New Zealand geography, Waiheke, it's almost half the size of Waiheke, and they're about slightly less than 2,000 people on the island. Most Rotuman Islands have migrated to Fiji. Other diasporic hotspots are Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and America. But the land itself is very untouched. It is quite old, even though a lot of people are not on the island. What else can I say about that? It is, yes, you're quite right. It is approximately 400 kilometers north of Fiji. And sometimes I smile to myself when I read descriptions of the distance of Rotuman from Fiji. Now, I've read 450, I've read 500 kilometers, I've read 600 kilometers. I'm going to write a poem about that titled Proximity and write down all the distances that I've read about Rotuman and its proximity to Fiji. But yes, not many people know about Rotuman. I find that introducing myself here in New Zealand as a Rotuman Islander, I often have to give a geography lesson first because many people have never heard of Rotuman or its relationship to Fiji. So I have to go unravel all of that. But we became a dependency of Fiji way back in 1881 when the British administration there gave us to Fiji, because at that time Fiji was one of the hubs there. The colonial hub of the Pacific was Fiji, and it was run by a man by the name of 𝚁𝚎𝚎𝚎. So I think as a matter of convenience, we were given to Fiji to look after, and we've always been part of Fiji since then. But our language is different, culture is different.
You know,
that's very short.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love it. Thank you so much for taking us through that, because yeah, I'm just when I was researching Rotuman, just the fact that it's untouched, like it's an untouched paradise. You would think tourism back, that would be a thing, but I was just like, wow, like how many of our islands are untouched, and have that luxury of saying, hey, you know what, we're still the same as. So it's so cool. Yeah, I was surprised when I looked that up.
Yes, but I think I need to be careful with the word untouched, because we were touched.
We were touched.
We were touched.
Right.
We were touched in in the 1980s. I was still in Fiji when the 𝚁𝚎𝚎 cruise liner visited the island of Rotuman. Yes. And so the island was, I think if I remember correctly, the island was divided. There were people who the 𝚁𝚎𝚎, there were pictures of people selling their handicrafts to the 𝚁𝚎𝚎. And of course, there were a group that were quite disappointed that the 𝚁𝚎𝚎 had arrived. But since then, we have never had any cruise liners visiting the island. And it is, if you want to go to the island, you have to go with a Rotuman Islander. You have to be associated with a family for them to take you there. You just can't rock up to Rotuman and get off and say, where's your backpackers? Where's your B&B? There's no such thing. The islanders will look at you and say, get back on the plane and go where you come from. It doesn't happen. Hey? So I'm very, very happy about that. But I'm sure, a part of me says that it may change later in the future. I don't know, but I'm hoping that we stay that way.
So did you do all of your schooling, education in Fiji?
Yes.
Wow.
I was born in a little town called 𝚁𝚘𝚡𝚘𝚡, which is part of the gold mining settled in the western part of Fiji. I did all my primary school years there, my secondary school year there. I did my first undergrad there at the University of the South Pacific. Then I did some studies with the University of Southern Queensland, and then here in Aotearoa. But yeah,
New Zealand.
Totally Fiji born and raised.
Wow. And so in terms of, go ahead.
But I've been to my grandmother who raised us in the 70s before she migrated to Australia herself. I'm wearing her scarf today because I'm honoring her. She was my first storyteller, my grandmother. She took us to the island for 3 years, and we lived there in the island, and then she brought us back in 75, 76. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up your grandma, because I wanted to ask, like, who were, you're a writer, you're a poet, like, who were the first storytellers for you? And did you have access to books, or were they stories that your parents and your grandparents told you?
Oh my gosh, that's when you say grandmothers, I'm just going to go there a little, and then I'll come back to you. We're part of a panel. There are 4 researchers here at the University of the South Pacific. We're part of a panel where we're paying homage to our grandmothers and how our grandmothers influenced us in our research. And so when you ask about that, I said, yeah, my grandmother has her impact on, I have found a place for her in my research because she's still alive. She is my first storyteller. She's my first book. I didn't grow up with books, believe it or not. We grew up with stories. I mean, she was the book, eh? She was the one telling us the stories every night on her mat or on her mattress or in a mosquito net in Vatukola at the time in the 1970s. So my stories were through her. And it was when I went to school that I started, the books, the libraries in the schools. I can still remember when my grandmother left, I giggled because I think of those books now with a lot of fondness. When my grandmother left in the 1980s, my parents then started taking us to the Silver City Library. And my first book was on Clifford the Red Dog. What were those other books? The little golden books. Remember those?
Oh, yes.
The little golden books. And then when I went to secondary school and going further, there were the Enid Blyton series, and all the Secret Seven and all of those. And then, dare I say, then I got into secondary school and then I was introduced to Mills and Boons and Harlequin Romance.
No judgment,
my friend.
no judgment.
And in those books, when we started reading those books, we would hide them under the pillow because, we were not allowed to read those books in the house. So my dad would say, "Oh, Mills and Bones in the house." So we'd read. My sister and I would read, and then we would hear our parents coming. We hide the books under the house, under the pillowcases. So and then I started into the serious reading when you got into university and doing the literature degree and the literary fiction and all of that. But that was my reading history.
Wow. But at what point, though, I wonder, did you get interested in actually writing? Like creating your own stories? Was it university or was it in high school? Did someone inspire you?
Yes, it was in high school. And I think I carried my mother's love of storytelling into primary and into high school. But it was in high school that we had these fantastic English teachers. And I remember them, all of them. And I first started writing for the magazine. Most of us write for the magazine, the school magazine. And I had this one, and she's in New Zealand now. I've been wanting to get in touch with her. She was Mrs. Grace Reddy. She was our English teacher at All Saints Secondary School. And then when I went to high school, it was Mrs. Pauline Chang, Pauline Ryland, all these wonderful English teachers that encouraged us to write in the magazine. And we loved to write. And English was my favorite subject. I loved English more than any others and excelled in English more than the other subjects. Yeah, but yes, the English teachers were very important in the growth of that. And then I took it on to university. But somehow university was very serious,
Yes.
University kind of took out the playfulness and the love of writing. Suddenly I had to be serious and read all this literary fiction and write all these things. And then I kind of picked up the writing after university. So yeah, that was very strange, eh?
Oh, I love it. So in terms of your writing, you as a writer, your creative process, can you describe the space where you do your writing? Are you a desk person? I need to relax outside under a tree, kind of like, what does your space look like when you're creating these stories in your mind or writing?
So it depends on the phase of a particular piece. So if I'm on the go, so I often have my phone with me all the time, and I open up to the apps. I have the notes app open.
Yes.
So I'm constantly recording things as if I see something that catches my attention, or if I hear someone and it makes me respond in a certain way, I'll quickly write it down. Or if I read something, or if I watch something on Netflix and I like it and I write it down, or if I have an idea and I write it down. So I collect first. I kind of collect stuff first on the apps, on the note-taking app. Then I'll mull over it and mull over it, keep thinking about it like creative minds do, tear it apart. And then when I'm ready with an idea to, to record it all down, then I go to the computer. So it's in different spaces. And then if the end product is often on the computer. But, creatives are cursed with not being satisfied. We're constantly chopping, changing. Oh my God. So yeah, it can be tumultuous. It can be haphazard. But when I've been asked to write on a commission project, then I'm more disciplined because there's a deadline, and then I have to make sure that it fits the specs and make sure that it's out in this particular time. So yeah, it kind of depends on the writing task, and the phase of the writing.
Your poetry collection, the light and dark and our stuff. I read on this website that it was inspired by your 8-year-old nephew's observation that poetry books are boring because there are no pictures. So tell us about this nephew of yours who is probably not 8 years old anymore, but go ahead.
He's 12 now. His name is Oscar. So one day I decided to interview my niece and my nephew. My 𝚐𝚐 is 𝚐𝚊𝚜𝚐. He lives with me. He's the older brother, and his brother Oscar. But it was Oscar's response when I asked 𝚐𝚐𝚐 what was poetry. Oh, they all gave me what poetry. But it was Oscar's response. He was so candid. He was so straightforward with me. He said, I hate it. I hate poetry books. They're so boring. There's no pictures. So I was struck by that. I said, well, I'll give you, you want a poetry book with pictures? I'll give you a poetry book.
Wow.
So, it made me think about poetry books and and how we present poetry to young people, or how we present poetry itself. So poetry has often not been, I think, in my opinion, has often not been taught well. I mean, we often beat it too hard, and we formalize it too much. And so, and rarely do I see pictures in poetry books. And I love playing with the graphic and the text. I love the relationship between the graphic and the text. So I decided to, this is going to be my first collection, and I'm going to put pictures in them. And that's how it came about.
That's awesome. I was wondering about the publishing and that space. Like, how do you, as you were putting this collection together, did you already have a publisher that ready to go? Like, do you self-publish? Like, how difficult is it? Because you do the writing and you're like, this is it, I'm happy. But then that next step of actually getting the book, publishing it, getting it out there, promoting it. Do you have a team that help you do that, or is it self-promotion? Like, you are doing everything?
Well, with the light and dark in my stuff, I decided when I had this idea that I would publish it myself, because I wanted the book to look a certain way. I wanted the book to feel a certain way, in my hands. And sometimes I find that as writers, because it's often sent to a publisher, we do not have control of the final product, the artifact in our hands. So we don't see it until it's done. And I think the writing process should continue to the very end, where you get the product in your hand and you feel it and you hold it and you see what it's like. It's tangible. So I wanted that control. And I knew that if I'd given it to someone, they would have changed it. They would have, marketed according to their marketing models. And I really didn't want that, because the idea came from my nephew and I wanted it to be held with us. So I had to do my research. If Lani Wenyan was here, we would laugh, because our journeys are very similar. It was trial and error. We didn't know. But so it was a lot of research for me. How do I get it published? What do I do? What the hell is an ISBN number?
All those little things that matter.
I totally forgot about the ISBN number. So when the book went to press, when the book was printed, it came out, and then I said, oh, heck, I forgot the ISBN number. The ISBN number was done after, and then I had to print it on stickers and then put it on. But it was totally self-published, because I was very concerned of it looking a certain way. I wanted color, and so I was looking for a illustrator. I went and I looked for an illustrator, and I showed her my vision, and I showed her the kinds of images that I wanted with the poem. And so that's how we collaborated on the book. And because, to do a fully illustrated poetry book would be very costly. So I decided,
Right.
okay, this is my first one. So I'm going to do a small chapter book instead of 10 poems only. So that's how it came about. What an interesting process it was. Whether I do it again, probably.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, does that give you courage to be like, you know what? I did it the first time. It was great. And, because listening to you, it's like having the say, right? Having, you are making all those important calls. The last thing you want is the book to come and you're looking at it like, that's not how I wanted it to look. So are you more confident now to say that my next project, perhaps I will work with another
Yes.
team, another small team?
Yes. So that's such a good question, because I actually asked myself that after the book was released, and I sent it out, and I said to myself, so what did I do then that I would do differently now? What I would do differently now is I would get on board a reader, someone, because I didn't test read it. I wanted it to be there like this. So I would get a number of poets on board to test read it, to give me feedback, etc., which I didn't do in the first one.
Right.
So I'm going to definitely keep that in mind. And I've identified poets that I'm going to send my work. Can you please read this?
That's awesome. And it's good to know that you have people that you can reach out to, other poets, have a collective that you can, since you did the anthology, I'm sure there are a number of people that contributed to the 𝚊𝚜𝚜𝚜 anthology that you can reach out to. So I'm excited for you. Like, I think it's great that you're just out there doing your thing and doing it the way that you want it to be, produced. I love it. Absolutely love it.
But I must acknowledge 𝚊𝚜𝚡𝚊𝚜𝚎 here, because when I wanted to self-publish, she was the only Pacific writer, if not the only Pacific writer at that time, who was publishing and doing a lot of self-publishing. So I was I said, look at this woman, man. She is doing what she wants to do and taking control. So I drew inspiration from her, and she's a phenomenal writer and a fellow sister writer who supports other writers. Phenomenal. Yeah.
Amazing. Phenomenal. Shout out to 𝚊𝚜𝚡𝚊𝚜𝚎. Oh my gosh. It is Rotuman Language Week, and I wanted to, because again, I was doing some research on you, and Rotuman language, it's actually listed as one of UNESCO's endangered languages, right? And I wanted to talk about the work that you are doing.
Oh, thank you. So the work that I'm doing is connected to my PhD research here at the University of Waikato. I have an applied linguistics background, so I'm interested in languages and how they're taught in schools, etc., or how languages are taught and how they permeate in communities. So in my PhD research, it's a PhD with creative practice. I'm looking at the conditions that allow for the multilingual writing of poetry, Rotuman English. So the creative component of that research is a collection of multilingual Rotuman English poetry. So what I'm interested in seeing is how the reading of Rotuman creative language text impacts the creativity, the creative writing of multilingual Rotuman English poetry. So my research is connected to Rotuman language regeneration and all of that in New Zealand. But I think in my research, I'm constantly thinking about the role of English. And this is very controversial, because we often tend to pit languages against each other,
Yeah.
We often tend to pit languages against each other, and we often tend to villainize English. And I get that. I think we all get that, and we all know where that's coming from because of what, education policies have done to our languages. But I'm looking at how English can work together with 𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚎, Rotuman language, into generate languages. Because in the diaspora in New Zealand, there are a lot of young people who don't speak Rotuman. And so to throw them into the deep end or to expose them to texts that are 100% Rotuman, they're going to struggle. So how do we use English to transition them slowly into the language? In terms of working with other community members here in Hamilton, I have a good group of Rotuman haharongi here in Hamilton. There is this wonderful young man who is so instrumental in the Rotuman language space. His name is 𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚎𝚐, and I'd like to shout out to him here. He is a phenomenal youth leader here. He is so good with the language, and he draws people together. And that's where my work is, here in Hamilton community, in my family, and the research.
Yeah, you mentioned young people, and I was wondering, in terms of the language and the culture, with your Rotuma community there in New Zealand, is there an interest from, young people to really learn about their culture and learn the language? Or is it like, how do you catch them? How do you keep them? What things are being done to make sure that they retain that, or they are learning or continuing,
Yes.
those stories and traditions and rituals?
There seems to be evidence that there is some interest. I mean, here in New Zealand, the Rotuman communities in Auckland are quite strong. We have Rotuman services, Rotuman church every Sunday. Young people go to church and they hear those. There is a lot of work with Rotuman music, and there is another phenomenal Rotuman language champion in Auckland. Her name is 𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚐, and she was. Had you know her?
I read something about her. I was like, that name sounds familiar.
She was very instrumental in translating nursery rhymes into Rotuman. And there is also the PMN Pamana Rotuman program, which is, and I find that program, not only for me, but from what I read on Facebook and what I read on social media, that program is making a lot of connections with younger Rotumans. So I think we're in this space where yes, we are creating awareness and some ground with younger people. And I think some families too are doing that better than others. I struggle with my 14-year-old. I think it comes to journeys, eh? I mean, everyone has their different journeys. We would we really like all our young people to get on board quickly, but I think it slightly varies. But certainly there are programs and activities and things that are going on in the community where we're not short of it. And it's definitely, awareness is definitely there.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear. That is really, really good to hear. I was thinking about your poem, The Quickest Way to Trap a Folk Tale. And I read that it was in response to, there was some copywriting issues. Are you able to speak a little bit about that, or has it been resolved since this was written about or brought to light?
That was such an interesting poem to write. It took me a number of years to write it, and this is when I went back to this Rotuman writer Titi Whanua and his collection of short stories. When I started reading them, I took out his book when I came to New Zealand. You know, all these people in the diaspora, when they go away, they reach out for all their texts. So it was here in New Zealand when I pulled out Titi Whanua's book, and I started to look for, where is this book available? How do we get access to this book? I mean, it was at the University of Waikato Library, but if we didn't have the University of Waikato Library, how do my people get access to this book? And so when I started asking those questions, I started researching where the book was available. So the book was available at the University of the South Pacific Bookshop. They're available in libraries, but they're not available in free access form. So they were initially published in the Oceania Journal in 1939. And if you wanted to get a copy, and you can only get access to these journals if you're part of a library or you're part of a university, So access was so restricted, and I thought this is incredible that we have to go through a lot of obstacles in order to get these stories which belong to us. And I thought this is not right. And so the poem came out of that we have all these institutions going into our islands and our villages and taking stuff out and then locking them in copyright. Then when you want to get access to it, it's really hard to get access to it. So I was quite angry. About that. But this is the story behind the collection that was available at the University of the South Pacific, that it's available for $10. As if that makes it any better, for $10, because and I thought it should be free. It should be in a portal where if we wanted it, we can just go and download it. And that's where the poem came from. And I think a lot of institutions are irresponsible in not opening up their vaults to the public, especially when the knowledge comes from, us, the people. But I think we're moving in that direction. I think a lot of universities are now opening up and digitizing their information. The Australian National University has done that. University of Hawaii has done that. And I know Alan Howard has done a lot of research there, and he has digitized a lot of his stuff and put it on the web. The archives are beginning to digitize this stuff. Digita Pacifica, the Turnbull, they're all digitizing this. They're all catching up to this idea that the knowledge should not be kept in your vaults. These are part of the community, so bring them out. So that was the poem.
I wanted to ask because I thought, man, this is so crazy, because it's not just stories, artifacts. I mean, that's a whole nother chapter. That's a whole nother podcast episode. But it made me think about writers like yourself. Are there other other writers from Rotuman writers who are putting stories out there, putting resources out there, writing? Or is it growing? Is a collective starting to grow? Is it something that's still quite new? Are you on your own? Tell us a little bit about that.
I wish I could tell you I'm on my own, but I'm so glad to tell you that I'm not on my own.
Excellent.
So for my PhD proposal, I had to position my work within existing Rotuman literature. So I had to kind of go into the mapping of Rotuman literature and what Rotuman literature is, and where does the Rotuman literature start from, and who are the writers today. And I was telling my supervisor, the wonderful, beautiful, absolutely fantastic Dr. Alice Tipunga Somerville, that the body of Rotuman literature is so huge. It is so expensive that I was so pleasantly surprised. I remember when I was writing that section of my proposal, I would cry a lot because I was so emotionally overcome by finding all these writers, and their works in the archives. My grandfather's work, newsletters in the 1940s. 𝚐𝚊𝚜𝚎𝚐 but 𝚐𝚊𝚜𝚎𝚐 wasn't the only one writing. There were other short story writers like Macareta Manueli, and there were so many. And then now I find, and when we talk about poetry, I'm not the only poet. There's so many others. But this is the thing. You don't see them in mainstream media publication. They're all writing online. They're in the virtual spaces.
Okay.
We have phenomenal Rotuman language poets in the virtual spaces. I can name 3 off my fingers. There's 𝚐𝚊𝚜𝚎, 𝚐𝚊𝚜𝚎, and 𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚝, and Rupeni Fatiaki, and Manue Vilsoni. These
Wow.
are the online poets, and they're all writing in different spaces. Manu is writing in Dubai, Sarote and Safu are writing in Suva, I think. Yeah, Suva. And who's
Mm.
the other one? I've gotten his name. Oh, 𝚁𝚘𝚡𝚐𝚊𝚐 is also in Fiji. So we're all in these different places, writing in these different places. We also have a memoir
Wow.
writer, a woman who wrote a memoir about. So yeah, they are writers. There are many Rotuman
Wow.
writers. The literature is quite rich, and we often think of
Mm.
𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚐 Hiriniko as the only writer. There
Mm.
are. He's not the only one. There's many others.
Man, that's awesome. So another poem of yours, writing each other. So creative Waikato. It was Kotahitanga through Creativity campaign in 2020. So I come across, I'm searching you on YouTube, and I'm like, huh? Okay, what's this? And yeah, can you tell us a little bit? Because I've read that it was basically this project was to spark crucial conversations against racism and fuel the narrative for Kotahitanga, so unity. Can you
Mm.
speak a little bit to that experience being a part of um, that project?
Oh, I really love the project because, sometimes we often think, these catchphrases, working together, kotahitanga, they can be all of these catchphrases and, so I really wanted to approach that from a place that was very important to me. I just didn't want it to be, this flimsy solution for
Mm,
unity. No, I really wanted to hit hard where I was going. And at that time, when that request came, we had all this Black Lives Matter movement that was going
mm,
on. So a lot of that narrative was going on, and a lot of racism at the Waikato was going on, and we had this
mm,
huge problem. So I approached it from a literary point of view. You know how we approach literature. That literature is always English. We learn English. We learn this
mm,
literature, and our own languages are sidelined. So literature is the focus. I mean, this colonial mentality of pitting English against our languages. So my approach to Kotahitanga was, well, no. If you're really speaking of genuine Kotahitanga and unity, then you need
mm,
to shift. You need to make room. You need to move over and bring all the people that you have marginalized into the frame. So
mm.
the shift was me shifting from English to Rotuman in the poem. So I start off with English. I said, la la
Yes.
la. I learned my English, and then I said, but this is me. And then I write the story of Leah's Owl and the Pussycat, Rotuman version.
Yes, yes, because I was listening. I was like, "Oh, she's now speaking in Rotuman." Wait, does she just say the owl and the pussycat? What's going on here? I was like, "Wait a minute."
Yes, because in literature class, in my literature undergrad class, we learned the Norton anthology was the text that we had to learn, and then I got to learn about studied Leah's
Mm,
Owl and the Pussycat, and I recalled my literature teacher performing that poem in class. And so for me it was not, well, kohitanga means this is what kohitanga, Leah and the Owl and the Pussycat means to me, and I flipped it
mm,
to the Rotuman version of Owl and Pussycat. That for us the owl and the pussycat, they're enemies. Cat eats owl. I mean, they're not lovey-dovey, and they don't sail into the sunset. So I brought on that owl, cat eats owl, for Christ's sake. So, I turned it into a story. And so I said, yeah, this is our version of Leah's Owl and the Pussycat, my version, Rotuman style. And at the
mm,
end, I said, my call was, if you really wanted kohitanga, then you need to learn me as I've learned you. It has to be reciprocal and symbiotic, and not, mainstream versus marginal. So that was my solution for kotahitanga,
mm.
and us poets, all the poets that were asked to write, had to bring in a certain kind of solution or an interpretation of that term. So that was my interpretation.
Mm.
It's owl and pussycat against each other.
Nothing wrong with that. Gotta speak your truth.
Which is so
Yeah,
ironic in a way.
yeah. I was in terms of so Creative Waikato, with that project, are there other similar projects that you have been a part of, in terms of social justice and advocacy and activism? Like, are there other passion projects that you have been a part of or are currently part of,
Yes, I'm
social
currently.
justice?
Mhm. There's one that I'm currently preparing for, which is sometime in what is it? April. I should look at me. I'm
It's
checking.
May.
It's right. It's I better start. I better start shape. In June, I will be part of the International Poetry Festival on climate change. So we're all not climate change, world peace. So there
Mm,
are, I think it features 135 poets from around the world, and we will be. I think the festival comes from Colombia, so we're all
mm,
reading. I think there's 7 poets from New Zealand who are part of this. So, yep, I've written a number of pieces on world peace and what world peace means for me and my interpretation of what it is. And I will be participating in that.
mm,
Um, but no, I've also, other than that, I've just written from my own point of view, from my own private space and in reaction to other issues of social issues. But that's the one
mm,
that I'm currently preparing for right now.
mm. I was thinking about identity. You moved to New Zealand in 2007. In terms of your identity and who you are, um, how has moving to New Zealand? I mean, I know like 2007 was quite a while ago, but how has moving there really helped to, I guess, help you to become firm in your identity as a Rotuman woman, as an educator, as a learner, as a mother? I guess because we think about New Zealand, places like Auckland. I'm from Auckland, very multicultural, and you're around many different cultures, and I wonder how the experience has kind of really helped you, yeah, just in terms of your identity and yeah.
I mean, I think about that a lot, really. I'm ashamed to say that now that I'm in this space, I've been here for the last 14 years. I often reflect to my time in Fiji, and if I'm honest with myself, I think in Fiji I took a lot of things for granted, a lot of my Rotumanness for granted. I was very blasé about being Rotuma. I'm part of Fiji, yeah, Rotuma, you know, so what kind of a thing. But
Mm,
moving to New Zealand has really shifted my focus. I'm more aware of myself as a person in the diaspora.
mm,
I have developed that identity. I have started thinking about the myth of disconnection when you move from your islands, because I think that's quite dangerous to actually think that the further away you are, the more disconnected you are. It's done quite the opposite for me, actually. It's reaffirmed my connections, and lo and behold, it has strengthened my language. I am reading, writing, and speaking Rutuma now more than I ever did back in Fiji. Go figure, right? I mean, but this is what coming to New Zealand has done for me. And
mm,
also being with tangata whenua, being in a place where we see tangata whenua in their space, in
mm,
in the settler colony. And I appreciate being an Indigenous person even more, more so than I ever did in Fiji. I have a sharpened sense of indigeneity, my connection to land, to whenua, to people. And that has grown immensely being here. And it's also changed my writing
mm,
tremendously. I write now from a very different lens. I feel connected to other Rotumans in Australia, in other hotspots around the world. So yes, the moving, making the decision to pack your bags and cross the sea. Yeah, a lot of things come with it. A lot of beautiful things. For me, it
mm.
has intellectually, spiritually, emotionally.
You were a contributor for 𝚁𝚎 anthology, stories by women of the Moana. I mean, this
Mm,
just the wealth of knowledge, the writers, just oh my goodness. Tell me what it was like to be a part of this, to be able to contribute, you know, some, your writing to this anthology, knowing that there are other strong women.
yeah.
Just oh my goodness.
I was very honored to have been asked, really. And
Mm,
this book for me is special, not because it's my first short story ever
mm,
written. So, I mean, it's the first short story ever published, but it is what 𝚤𝚎 and Cecilia did. You know, they had this idea. They said, okay, let's run with it. They ran with it. They didn't need to ask anyone permission. They
right.
didn't need to check with anyone. They just, they went and they did this book. And for me, it's like, well done on you. But knowing the gates that we have with mainstream publication, they want it to be this standard, they want it to be that standard. Cecilia
Mm,
and 𝚤𝚎 said, no, it'll be about us. This is the way we want to do it, and we will do it this way. And so, my deepest admiration to Cecilia and 𝚤𝚎. That was my first point. But writing that short story
yes.
was
Tell us
so
about
interesting.
your short story.
The deadline was short, so I had to really push. I had to really push myself, and I had to, but really put on. So when I say about when you're writing for a commission, when you're writing for a specific task, the pressure is on, because you know the deadline. So I had to really think about. I submitted that twice. Submitted that twice because I read poets just write
Right,
few
right.
stanzas, send it off. But this they wanted 3,000 words, so I had to push to get to I don't know how I did it, but 𝚤𝚎 and Cecilia were phenomenal in their feedback.
Mm,
They wanted more. They told me that they wanted more, and the feedback was kind and generous and very encouraging to the point that, okay, I'm going to go back to my keyboard and I'm going to do it again. So you know what? I was inspired to get back to the keyboard and finish it off and send it. And I was quite happy with the final product. But you see, the editorial process was also very good. They were
mm.
they handled our stories, my story, my experience. They handled it. They took care of it, and they gave us good feedback. But far out. And I was in the middle of writing my proposal.
Man.
I only had a month to go, and so short story and proposal going on at the same time. So yes, I'll never forget that. It's a special book for me and a special
Mm.
story because of the process and the way it was handled. But far out. And I thank them. I thank them so much for the opportunity. So if there is another part two, I'm going to be writing another.
Start writing right now. Right now.
Start writing another one. Yeah, that was the
So
process.
you mentioned your very first short story.
Mm.
For the listeners, for those watching, man, tell us about the idea. Like, what was it? The first spark for the idea? Like, it's your first short story. Like you said, poetry. ah, it's so easy. You just get it done. But man, this is a whole nother level of.
Yes, the shots. Yes, I'm an impatient writer. I just want the text to start and wrap up quickly
Mm,
and done, tied up next. But this one here, I had to think about the characters. I needed to think about how the story transitioned and
mm,
all of that stuff that I had to think about. But the story, the writing of the 𝚤𝚎 started in a creative writing class called Voices and Image that I took
mm,
2 years ago. So the story kind of started, the bare bones of the story was laid in that creative writing class. And I submitted it as a portfolio, as part of my portfolio. And so when 𝚤𝚎 and Cecilia wrote, they said, do you have anything? Do you have anything that you can, And I said, oh, I have the story. I can do it. So, so I pulled the story out. And then I started working on the story. And then it just started growing and growing. Part one, sent it. They gave me feedback. Part two, it just developed into the Vuniwai. So the bones were planted 2 years ago, and the story completed last year. So it's quite a process.
That is awesome. Do you want to write a novel? Is that, I feel like naturally that's the next step. Just saying, wink, wink. Just saying. Do you, or I don't know, like
Oh,
what?
I'll have, I'll have to train for that, do literary training, the stamina. I have a lot of admiration for people who write novels. The stamina to keep up with writing the novel, perhaps, maybe in the future, but I have to build my literary muscles first to keep up with the stamina. Otherwise, I'm going to get puffed out by word 3,000.
Oh, you're so funny. You mentioned muscles, so that takes me to my next point, self-care. How do I ask all the guests this question, like
Oh,
how do you look after yourself? Like how do you make sure that your family is, like everyone's in check now. Now this is me time. How do you do that? What do you do?
I read and I write. Sometimes writing can be the thing that switches me off from all the catch going on in the background. I visit my brother's grandchildren, my grandnieces and nephews. I find a lot of enjoyment hanging around with little people. Hey, little people, but only for a while. After that, you want to go home.
You're like, I've had enough. Please go.
Oh, I missed you, but now I have to go home now. Yeah, so hanging out with my little people, Netflixing. Oh my God, binge watching Bridgerton. Ha ha ha! I've binge watched all those episodes in Netflix. So these things, binge watching, creative writing, reading, and sometimes I find that walking helps me a lot. And I started getting into the walking during lockdown, when you couldn't go out anywhere. So I would
Right.
walk around the neighborhood. My gosh, I know every cul-de-sac, crook and cranny in my neighborhood now. Seriously, but walking is lovely. A lot of creative ideas come to you when you're walking. So those are my go-to: walking, little people, Netflix. What else? Writing, reading.
Oh, I love that. Future in terms of projects and future goals and aspirations, what do you have in mind? What do you have in store for us, for
Aw.
the fans of your writing, for your followers?
Those are very good things to have, First of all, complete my PhD. Complete
Mm,
my PhD and publish my first collection of multilingual poetry that looks at Rotuman language generation. That is my immediate future, my near
mm,
goal. The other one is I had the other one and I've forgotten what it was now. Oh, yes. The other one is to publish a set of children's books. This is when we talk of Rotuman literature, this is one
mm,
gap in the Rotuman literary space. We don't have too many children's
mm.
books. So that's an area that I'd like to go into. Collection of children's literature and my first collection, full collection of multilingual poetry. And of
Mm.
course, finish the bloody PhD.
Finish the PhD, finish or do all of that, and then start on the novel.
Wink, wink. Okay, we'll see.
Wink, wink. If a book was named, if a book was written about you, what do you think that book would be called?
Rebel.
Okay, Rebel. Okay, okay. I like that. We
Rotuman
can work with
Rebel.
that.
Rotuman Rebel.
Rotuman Rebel R². I like
Uh,
that. I like that.
blah.
um, book recommendations. We're nearing the end. What do you have for us? What are you reading, or what would you say is this is a must read?
For me, it's not who, but what. So
Mm.
I've got a huge literary crush on medical practitioners, doctors, surgeons who can
Oh.
write creatively. So if you were to ask me, recommend a poetry collection, I would say drop hands down Playing God by Glenn Colquhoun, this
Mm.
book, if you have this book.
Oh, okay.
So he's a medical practitioner, but he writes poetry, and all his poems are based on his clinical cases and his
Wow.
patients. Yes, so I enjoy this kind of literature. I enjoy doctors who write creative literature. So that's my mojo.
Yeah, how did you even come across that though? I'm like, you were just looking for something to read and came across medical like I don't know how does that
So,
happen?
so my love for the medical humanities and doctors, medical literature,
Mm.
creative literature, started in 2003, and I pulled this book out to show you. 2003. How many years ago was that?
19.
Uh, 19 years ago. Very quickly, when I bought this book from the University of the South Pacific Library, From the
Oh.
Edge of the Couch, Bizarre Psychiatric Crisis and What They Teach Us About Ourselves. So this guy, he's a psychiatrist, but his writing is
Mm.
creative nonfiction. And I fell in love with this writing style. And so I've always been looking for surgeons, especially surgeons, and their experience with bodies and
Mm.
people and general practitioners and their creative non-fiction writing of those cases. And I've been reading quite a bit of this type of literature. But for poetry, this is the one. And this
Gotcha.
is what he was. When did I arrive? 2007? 2008. I moved to New Plymouth and I was on my own, my first job in New Plymouth. And on the TV at 8 o'clock in the morning, he was featured on, he was one of the people on the program. And I was just transfixed looking at him and him talking about his poetry. And then I went and found his book. I went and bought his book. And ever since then, I have a big, big fan of creative, medical, creative nonfiction.
That
That's
is
my
awesome.
thing.
That is so, you know what? I am so intrigued. I mean, that is so fascinating. I feel like after this, I'll be doing some Googling. Like, I need to find out who these people are,
With
what they're writing.
This is another person, Atul
Wow.
Gawande, that I read. He writes about the care of the elderly. I've read
Mm.
this book. This is really good. Yeah. And this is my partner earned brownie points by giving me this birthday present.
I love it. He knows you well, and he should.
I said, good man, good man, good man. I'll cook you dinner. I'll cook you dinner.
Oh my
So
goodness. You are
those
just
are my
life.
recommendations.
I love it. That is I can't even tell you how much I am going to be taking away from this interview. Like I'm like amazed. I'm inspired. I don't even know what else to say, to be honest. Um However, we have reached, we're now drawing to an end. And I just let me get myself together. I have to say, Mary, it is I just it is such an honor to have you on the show. Like I am just so appreciative of the fact that I know everyone's busy. I know you're a PhD student. I know you've got a lot going on. But when I reached out to you, you responded. You didn't give me the scene. You actually responded, and I appreciate that. And I am just so grateful for the wisdom and the gems and the energy and the inspiration that you've shared in this
Thank you.
interview. Like there are so many takeaways I'm still trying to process. And so I wanted to thank you. I just want to thank you so much for sharing a bit of your journey. Yeah, not just as a writer, but life journey, culture, your identity, your people, your
Mm,
language. Thank you so much. I want to wish you all the best
thank
for the
you.
rest of the year. You got this. You've got, get that PhD, get it done. You've got this. I know you got this. All the best. Wishing you and your family well. Stay safe, as we continue to live through this pandemic. Um, yeah, but I'm excited to just continue to follow your journey and see where you're going. Um, and that Rotuman language is staying alive, and the
Mm.
culture is, you keep building your communities. Like I love to see that. So thank you. I will now hand it over to you just to share some final words of encouragement for anyone who's perhaps looking for some motivation as a writer or just life in general.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for this space. Is not only me talking about my work, but it's also a space for me to talk about the Rotuman language and knowing that it's Rotuman language speak. So thank you for opening up your space for the language during this particular time in New Zealand. I really, really appreciate that. So I'm very, very happy to stay up and talk to you with cups of coffee. um, Advice for up and coming writers. As English people who teach English, we know the value of reading, and
Mm,
it is very hard to write if you do not read. So I would
mm,
encourage you, anyone who's thinking of writing, to read prolifically. If you're a poet, read poetry prolifically. If you want to write novels and short stories, read short story writers, read novelists. And there is this advice that I'm going to steal from 𝚁𝚘𝚝𝚎, which I thought was
mm,
quite good, eh? Don't ghettoize your reading, meaning don't just only read
mm,
certain groups of people, read widely, see what's out there, read widely. And with writing, now back to writing, find people, find groups, find communities whom you can share your writing with. When I arrived in New Zealand, I looked for a group of writers to work with, and I found a group in Hamilton called Poets Alive. They've been helpful in reading writing and critiquing writing, giving feedback. So those would be my two main suggestions for people who are setting out to write. Read prolifically and find like-minded people who are on similar journeys. Make friends with them. Insist on them.
insist.
But don't force line it. No, insist. No, but
Insist, but
seriously.
don't force it.
Yes, but seriously. Find your tribe. Find your
Mm.
tribe of writers and find your readers. Find your books and run from there. Run. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you for the opportunity.